When Emily moved into her new apartment, she felt as if her life was finally falling into place. The building had a quaint charm, crown moldings, creaky wooden floors, and a view of the bustling city below. But as she unpacked her belongings, her sense of security wavered. In the back of the bedroom closet, hidden behind a pile of forgotten junk, she discovered a mysterious glass box. It was larger than a shoebox, with thick, crystal-clear walls that were strangely cold to the touch. Inside was a meticulously detailed miniature replica of her new apartment. The craftsmanship was flawless. Every piece of furniture, every window, even the peeling paint on the kitchen cabinets had been reproduced with eerie accuracy. Emily stared in awe, marveling at the tiny, delicate details. But what struck her the most was the presence of a tiny figurine inside the box. It was unmistakably her, a woman with dark hair and a green sweater, standing in the middle of the miniature living room. The figure was posed with one hand on her hip, the same stance she'd taken while surveying her new space earlier that day. She laughed nervously, brushing off the strange coincidence as an elaborate prank by a previous tenant. Still, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Why would someone go to such lengths to create something like this? And why leave it behind? The next morning, Emily noticed something odd. The tiny figure inside the glass box had moved. It was now standing in the kitchen, positioned by the counter, where Emily had prepared her breakfast an hour earlier. Her chest tightened as she examined it closely. It wasn't just her actions that were mirrored. The countertop had a miniature coffee mug placed exactly where she had left hers. At first, she told herself it was her imagination. Maybe she had simply overlooked these details the day before. But over the following days, the changes became undeniable. The figurine shifted positions whenever Emily wasn't looking, accurately reflecting her daily activities. If she left her keys on the coffee table, they would appear in the model. If she knocked over a chair, it would also be toppled in the glass box. Then, the glass box began to predict her movements. One evening, she noticed the figurine lying on the bathroom floor, face down. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. She rushed to the bathroom, expecting to find herself sprawled there, but everything was normal. She convinced herself it was nothing more than a bizarre coincidence. Her unease grew when shadows began flickering at the edges of her vision. Doors creaked when no one was there, and faint whispers echoed through the apartment at night. She started having nightmares, dreams of being trapped in a small, confined space, endlessly watched by unseen eyes. Then the box's predictions turned darker. The figurine was posed next to a shattered window one morning. That same afternoon, Emily accidentally knocked over a glass of water, and it splashed against the very window the figurine had been standing near. A day later, the tiny Emily was staring into the closet, directly at the box. One night, Emily was awoken by a faint tapping sound. Her heart pounded as she scanned the room, her eyes landing on the glass box. The figurine inside had moved again. It was now pressed against the inner wall, its tiny face turned upward, staring directly at her. She screamed and tried to destroy the box. She hurled it across the room, but it didn't even crack. She smashed it with a hammer, lit it on fire, and even submerged it in water, but nothing worked. The box remained unscathed, its eerie contents intact. That night, Emily dreamed of herself walking out the front door and down the street, her surroundings growing darker and quieter. When she woke up, she checked the box and froze. The miniature version of herself was outside the apartment, standing in the middle of the road. Over the next few days, Emily stopped leaving her apartment, terrified of what the box might show. But each time she looked, the figurine moved farther from the building. It wandered through the city, stopping in strange, desolate places Emily had never been. One morning, she awoke to find herself staring into the glass box, not as the woman who had once held it, but from within. Her real apartment loomed beyond the glass walls, massive and distorted. Panic set in as she realized she was now the tiny figurine, trapped and powerless. From outside the box, she could see her apartment door creak open. A new tenant entered, their curious gaze drawn to the closet. The glass box, now dusty and forgotten, awaited its next victim. Inside, Emily screamed, but no one could hear her. While visiting his late grandparents' dilapidated countryside home, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of nostalgia mixed with unease. The house, once a vibrant gathering place for family holidays, now stood in eerie silence. Dust blanketed the furniture, cobwebs stretched across the corners, and the creaking floorboards echoed his every step. It had been years since anyone had stepped foot inside. Now, with his grandparents gone, Ethan had come to sort through their belongings and prepare the house for sale. On his second day, while exploring the library, a room he barely remembered from childhood, Ethan noticed something strange. One of the bookshelves, unlike the others, wasn't flush against the wall. Faint scratches on the wooden floor beneath it hinted that it had been moved frequently. He gave the shelf a tentative shove, and it groaned in protest as it slid aside, revealing a narrow wooden door hidden behind it. The door was old and warped with age, its surface etched with strange, jagged marks. It hung slightly ajar, and a cold draft seeped through the gap, carrying with it the faint metallic tang of rust or blood. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave it alone, but curiosity gnawed at him. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room beyond was small and dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. At first glance, it seemed like a forgotten storage space. But as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Ethan's heart began to race. The room was filled with items from his childhood, or at least things that seemed to be. A battered red tricycle sat in the corner, its handlebars rusted and the paint peeling. It looked just like the one he'd ridden as a boy, yet something was off. His name was crudely carved into the frame, but he had no memory of ever doing that. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, toys, and clothes from decades past. There was a faded baseball cap, an old action figure, and a patched-up blanket, all eerily familiar, yet alien. On a low table in the center of the room sat a photo album, its leather cover cracked with age. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the album. The photos inside were of him, but not him. They showed a boy who looked exactly like him, playing in places he didn't recognize and surrounded by people he'd never met. In one photo, he was at a birthday party with children he'd never seen before, the cake decorated with the words, "Happy 8th birthday, Ethan." He couldn't remember this party. He couldn't remember these faces. As he flipped through the album, the images grew more disturbing. In one photo, he was sitting alone on a swing, staring directly at the camera with a vacant, lifeless expression. Another showed him standing in a dark room identical to the one he was in now. On the final page was a photo of him at that very moment, sitting at the table, holding the album, terror etched across his face. The sound of scraping metal jolted him from his daze. He spun around to find the door gone. The bookshelf was back in place, sealing him inside. Panic surged through him, and he clawed at the walls, screaming for help. The air grew colder, and the flickering bulb dimmed further until the room was bathed in shadow. The objects in the room began to change. The tricycle's handlebars stretched and twisted into spindly, claw-like shapes. The teddy bear in the corner, which he hadn't noticed before, stood on its hind legs, its button eyes glowing with a sinister red light. The photos in the album morphed, now showing horrifying images of him trapped, screaming, and begging for release. A deep, raspy voice echoed through the room, its source unseen. "You've found what was forgotten. Now, let us rewrite what is to come." The walls began to close in, the ceiling lowering, and the once static objects in the room started moving toward him. Ethan's screams echoed in the confined space, but outside, the house remained still and silent. By the time his family came to check on him weeks later, Ethan was nowhere to be found. The hidden door was gone, the bookshelf standing flush against the wall. The house, however, seemed darker, colder, as though it had swallowed something or someone. The group of 4 friends, Max, Rachel, Leo, and Clara, had always shared a love of adventure. Road trips, hikes through the wilderness, and spontaneous treasure hunts were their favorite pastimes. On a crisp autumn morning, they stumbled upon a decrepit antique shop while driving through a remote mountain town. The shop, with its crooked sign reading, "Curiosities of the Forgotten," seemed like the perfect place to indulge their curiosity. Inside, the shelves were cluttered with oddities, rusted tools, faded photographs, and relics of a time long past. Leo's attention was drawn to a peculiar map pinned under a glass case. It was yellowed with age, its edges frayed, and marked with symbols and paths that seemed to lead nowhere. But something about it felt magnetic, as if it were calling to them. "Hey, check this out," Leo said, waving the others over. The shopkeeper, a gaunt, pale man with unsettlingly sharp features, appeared out of nowhere. His voice was a low rasp as he said, "That map has a history. Those who follow it rarely return." His warning only intrigued them more. "We'll take it," Max said, brushing off the ominous tone. The man hesitated, his bony fingers clutching the edge of the case. "If you insist," he said, almost whispering. As they left, he muttered something under his breath, but none of them caught the words. The map led them to the edge of a dense forest, where a faint trail wound deeper into the trees. The friends were exhilarated, joking about buried treasure or forgotten ruins. But as they walked, the atmosphere grew heavy. The chirping of birds and rustling of leaves faded into an eerie silence. After hours of hiking, they found themselves at the mouth of a cavern carved into the rocky hillside. The entrance was jagged, almost like teeth, and the air emanating from within was damp and cold. Clara hesitated. "Are we sure about this?" she asked, her voice betraying her nerves. "Come on," Max said, holding up the map. "We didn't come all this way to chicken out." They stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cavern walls were covered in strange, ancient carvings, symbols that matched the ones on the map. The deeper they ventured, the more twisted the symbols became, their shapes contorting into something almost alive. An hour later, Rachel noticed something chilling. A red mark had appeared on the map, precisely over their current location. She pointed it out to the group, but they dismissed it as an old stain or a coincidence. They pressed on, but soon more marks began appearing, each one fresh and vivid, leading them deeper into the labyrinth. "Something's not right," Clara whispered. Her unease grew when they discovered signs of recent activity, discarded backpacks, broken flashlights, and smears of dried blood on the walls. "Who else has been down here?" Leo wondered aloud, but no one had an answer. Then came the sounds, low whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The whispers grew louder, echoing their names, taunting them. They spun their flashlights wildly, but no one was there. Clara screamed when her beam illuminated what appeared to be a human figure etched into the rock, its face frozen in a silent scream. Panic set in. They decided to turn back, but the cave had other plans. The paths behind them had vanished, replaced by walls of solid stone. No matter which direction they ran, they always ended up in the same place, a vast chamber with a blood-stained stone altar at its center. The map now glowed faintly, its crimson marks pulsating like a heartbeat. "Put it on the altar," Max suggested, his voice shaking. Leo hesitated but eventually slammed the map onto the cold stone. The whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. Suddenly the chamber grew colder, and a shadowy figure began to materialize above the altar. It was enormous, its form constantly shifting, with eyes that burned like embers. "You've come too far," it said in a voice that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. "And now, you belong to me." Chaos erupted. The shadow lunged toward them, its tendrils snaking out to grab Clara. Her scream was cut short as she was pulled into the darkness. The others ran, desperately searching for an exit. Rachel tripped and fell, her flashlight skidding across the ground. When she looked up, she saw Leo being dragged into the shadows, his cries fading into silence. She and Max pressed on, their breaths ragged and hearts pounding. They finally spotted a faint glimmer of light, the cave's entrance. Summoning every ounce of strength, they sprinted toward it. But just as they reached the threshold, Max felt a cold hand grip his ankle. He turned to see the map floating in midair, its red marks forming words, "You cannot escape." Max screamed as he was yanked backward, vanishing into the darkness. Rachel, tears streaming down her face, stumbled out into the forest. She ran until dawn, collapsing on the side of a dirt road. The authorities never found the cave, nor any trace of her friends. But Rachel knew the map was still out there, waiting for its next victims. To this day, she can hear whispers in the dead of night, calling her back to finish what they started.